Hello and welcome to the Palmore Institute's video lesson series. My name is Lowell and today we will be looking at the senior reading course. So let's begin. In today's lesson, we'll be looking at Chapter 4, When the Employees Own the Company. So our learning goal for today's lesson is to learn about worker-owned businesses. What do we mean by worker-owned businesses? Well, worker-owned businesses are companies in which employees have a significant and broad-based ownership stake. That means they own part of the company. Significant in this case means that workers own at least 30% of the business. Broad-based means that meaningful access to ownership is open to every employee, and that concentration of ownership is limited. So let's take a look at some questions about employee-owned companies. So our first question, what are some potential benefits of employee-owned companies? Well, they may be able to create more jobs. That's a potential good point. They may be able to generate more wealth for their employee owners instead of all that money going up to the CEOs or shareholders. And they may be able to give back impressive amounts of money to the communities that they operate in. Question number 2, why do some companies become employee-owned? Every employee-owned company has its own story about how it started. Although some companies are employee-owned from the start, most become employee-owned through an employee ownership conversion, so they change into that form. The most common conversion involves a business owner who's looking to retire but doesn't have a succession plan in place. He or she wants to exit the company or retire but isn't sure what to do. Maybe he or she doesn't have kids, or his or her kids don't want to take over the business. The owner could sell the business to a competitor or private equity, but that could mean some uncomfortable changes in the company. Might not make the employees so happy. So, and as an alternative, we have what could be company-owned, employee-owned companies. Another possible fact regarding this is, so the owner thinks about selling the business to his or her employees instead of selling it to a competitor. An employee ownership conversion offers many advantages, particularly to the employees. The business owner gets to exit the company or retire on his or her own timeline while ensuring that his or her legacy will be preserved or saved. At the same time, the employees who helped build the business are rewarded through equity ownership, so they own a certain amount of the company. Some companies are employee-owned from the beginning. However, these companies tend to be started up by groups with a strong desire for employee ownership. Question number 3, how common is employee ownership? Employee ownership is very common, but employee-owned companies are relatively rare. In the US, perhaps there are between 4,000 to 5,000 employee-owned companies, but this represents less than 0.2% of US businesses with at least 5 employees. Ultimately, it's hard to know exactly how many employee-owned companies there are today. There aren't very clear statistics for this. And ownership structures are complicated, and most, if not all, employee-owned businesses are private, so they don't have to publicly report ownership information. So it makes it more difficult to keep track of companies that are owned by the employees. Okay, question number 4, are there any publicly traded employee-owned companies? While there is nothing that prevents publicly traded companies from being employee-owned, publicly traded companies tend to be very large It is rare that employees own enough of the company for it to be considered a significant ownership stake. And there could be a few publicly traded employee-owned companies, but it's not very clear if there are. And our fifth question, what is a worker cooperative? It's a similar term to an employee-owned company, but there are some slight differences. Worker cooperative is a special type of employee-owned company. What differentiates a worker cooperative is that workers participate directly in the governance of the company on a one-person, one-vote basis. So all the employees have pretty similar amount of power in decision-making. This doesn't mean that all the decisions within the workplace are made by a committee. At a minimum, it means that the workers elect some or all of the board of directors on a one-person, one-vote basis. Voting based on people, not shares, is why worker cooperatives are often referred to under the banner of economic or workplace democracy, because everyone has a vote, basically, in a general sense. Okay, let's take a look at some vocabulary to preview before we begin our reading passage. We'll have 5 verb phrases to start with, and take a moment to match them with the definitions A, B, C, D, and E. You can pause the video if you like. Okay, let's take a look at 5 more. So let's match the vocabulary on the left, 6 through 10, with F, G, H, I, and J. You can pause the video if you like. Okay, let's take a look at the answers. Number 1, to take charge of something, to accept responsibility for something and have control over it. Usually we use this verb phrase as something a manager does or a CEO if they take over a company, a department. Number 2, to run something, to operate or manage something, for example, to run a company. To set up something, to prepare or arrange something for use. In this context, it will be used to set up a company, basically to start a company, prepare it. Number 4, to get rid of someone, to fire someone, or to end someone's employment has a little bit of a negative nuance, so be careful with that expression. And number 5, to go into business, to start working in a particular type of job or business. And number 6, to continue the family tradition. It's a verb phrase, to continue doing something that has been done by the people in a particular family for a long time. Could be like a family-owned and operated business that has continued for many decades or centuries. To start something up, or to start up something, to begin a new company, organization, or activity. And number 8, the people in charge. It's a noun phrase, meaning managers, supervisors, CEOs, owners, or important people. And number 9, we've got open book. It's an adjective phrase. It describes a business that provides or allows access of information, especially concerning business practices. And finally, number 10, to close their doors. That's a verb phrase meaning to stop operating a business for a short period of time or permanently. Okay, let's move on to our reading passage. You may want to turn on the captions if you haven't done so already. Alternatively, you could use this as a listening task and replay it with the captions later to check your listening comprehension. As you listen to the following reading passage, try to identify the answer to the following question. How do employees become worker owners? All right, so let's begin. When the employees own the company. King Arthur Flour is the oldest flour company in the United States. Its flour is of very high quality. Just ask the people who use it. All across North America, people who care about making fine bread by King Arthur flour. And the company even has customers in Switzerland, Japan, China, and Saudi Arabia. King Arthur flour began in the 1790s as the Sands, Taylor, and Wood Company, and members of the Sands family have stayed with the company all these years. Frank Sands was the fifth member of the Sands family to lead the company. He started working there in 1963 when his father was in charge of the business, and eventually Frank's wife, Brina, joined him there. When Frank and Brina decided to retire, none of their children wanted to take control of the family business, which meant that the future of King Arthur flour was uncertain. Then one evening, Brina asked Frank, "Who besides our kids is most like family?" The answer was clear: the people who worked at the company. Frank and Brina trusted them to continue the family tradition, so they began to let the employees take charge of the business. Today, the 160 employees of King Arthur own and run the company. Worker-owned businesses don't all start the same way. In some cases, workers at a successful company find a way to buy the business. In other cases, a company fails, but the employees react by working as a team to start it up again. Often, a group of people decide to set up a new business together. What makes them want to do this? Some want to be part of the decision-making at their workplace. Others want a chance to share in a company's profits. There are various types of worker-owned businesses. Some of them make a product, like flour, and others provide a service, such as healthcare or cleaning offices. There are also various ways to organize these businesses. However, most worker-owned businesses share certain important ideas. One idea is that all the workers, not just the people in charge, should have the chance to be owners. A second is that all financial information about the company should be shared openly with the workers. A third is that the workers should have the right to vote on business decisions. Then they have real control. The worker owners at King Arthur believe in these ideas. They are proud to call King Arthur an employee-owned, open book, team-managed company. Here are the stories of how two more such companies began. 8 employees at a photocopy shop in Massachusetts, USA, were unhappy with their jobs. Working conditions were terrible and the pay was low, said one of the 8. Plus, we had no job security. The manager could get rid of any one of us at any time for any reason. We ran the shop for the owners and we started to ask, why can't we do it for ourselves? So they went into business together and started collective copies. 33 years later, they have 2 shops. One afternoon a month, they close their doors to meet and make business decisions. In Coamo, Puerto Rico, there weren't many jobs for young people. Miriam Rodriguez, who lived in Coamo, wanted to do something about it. She organized a committee to work on the problem, and the result of their efforts was a furniture business, Las Flores Metalarte. The business now has more than 150 worker owners producing tables, chairs, kitchen cabinets, and so on. The success of the company has led to other new businesses in the town, including a sandwich shop and a child care center. Worker-owned businesses are not unique to the United States, and their effects are not limited to the worker owners themselves. According to a study in Italy, worker-owned businesses are good for their communities. They lead to a higher quality of life. The researchers who did the study looked at things like healthcare, education, and social activities in many Italian towns. They also considered problems in the towns, such as crime. They found that towns with more worker-owned businesses were better places to live in almost every way. Okay, you can pause the video for a moment and think about that question. How do employees become worker owners? All right, let's take a look at your answer. The reading says there are several ways that someone might go from being an employee to becoming a worker owner. Sometimes the employees of a business find a way to buy it, either a successful business or one that has failed. Sometimes a group of people decide to set up a new business where all workers will also be owners and managers. Okay, for the homework for this lesson, if you have the textbook and you haven't read it yet, please read and review pages 36 to 47 in your textbook. If you haven't attended class, please do the exercises starting from pages 38 to 45. If you have attended class, please finish any exercises that you did not complete in class. If you're a current Palmore student, please choose 10 words and phrases from chapter 4 and type 10 sentences using the vocabulary. You can email it to Palmore or hand it to your instructor, who will check it and give you feedback on your sentences. You can also do the optional online activities through the Password 4 online workbooks. All right, I think that's about it for this video lesson. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave comments below, and until next time.